Great article in the Examiner. Proposition 22 in California coming up, funded by Uber and Lyft to the tune of $180 million, puts health of Lyft and Uber drivers at risk. What is this all about? Sneaky wording in ballot initiative would leave gig economy workers in the lurch, right? Californians do not fall for this cheap trick, for this cheap wording, right? They didn't pay into the safety net. You bailed the gig companies out during the pandemic, and they are putting the health of Lyft and Uber drivers at risk. The November 2020 election in California features a couple of large health-related ballot initiatives in contrast to Proposition 14 to boost stem cell testing and Proposition 23 to change laws around kidney dialysis centers. Proposition 22, which was put on the ballot by Uber, Lyft, and DoorDash to exempt their drivers from California labor laws, doesn't scream health emergency. But in reality, a yes or no vote on Prop 22 heavily impacts access to affordable health care for hundreds of thousands of people statewide. The workers' rights battle between the state of California and the gig economy started years after it should have. Lyft and Uber had already been operating for 6 years by the time Assembly Bill 5, which switched the classification of their drivers from independent contractors to employees, was introduced. Under state law, this change mandates the companies provide them with benefits. Prop 22 is a last-ditch effort to stop AB 5 from being implemented. Do not fall for it. Vote no on 22, right? While the ballot measure provides some benefits, it is very much a watered-down version of what the state would require, and it's full of holes. And the way they're trying to sell you 22 through these glamorous TV ads, don't fall for it. A broken health insurance promise. Prop 22 states that drivers who work more than 25 hours per week of engaged time, for example, the customer in the car would receive a health care subsidy amounting to 82% of the average California covered premium each month. There are two major flaws with this that drivers need to know, that Californians need to know. First, in May 2020, study of 640 drivers in the Bay Area data shows that while nearly a quarter of the gig economy workforce drives more than 30 hours a week, many spend a third or even half of that time waiting for rides. They're not calculating that in, folks. That means that while your app may be on 8 hours a day, it's possible only 5 of those would count toward accrued time for health insurance. And this is where they're not being straight up with drivers. This is where they're conning drivers. And this is what they're trying to con the Californian to believe, oh, we have all these marvelous protections in place. No, yeah, only if you work your ASS off, right? If you work around the clock like a hamster wheel morning to night, yeah, you might get something. There's a significant subset of full-time workers who wouldn't be covered even under this ballot initiative. A fellow of the Partnership of Working Families who has spent the past few months debunking much of Prop 22 claims will do. The companies come out and say most of the drivers are part-time anyway, but then seem to suggest that those part-timers are going to get some sort of health coverage when in fact they'll never see a cent. Second, even if a driver does reach the engaged time threshold, that would qualify them for health care subsidies. There is no agreed upon amount that workers would receive for their covered California health plan. There's no statewide monthly premium. Plans vary heavily based on geographic location, and while the ballot initiative demands that premiums be created, it wouldn't happen until after voters pass it. That's problematic, Fuentes says. Healthcare coverage plans and premiums under covered California vary dramatically by geography. Using a statewide average really does a disservice to urban drivers who are the primary backbone of this company. If you're going to offer a benefit, this is one way to erode it. The potential human impact of these policies is devastating. with subsidies dependent on hours. Drivers may be forced to work even when they're not well in order to meet their engaged time quota. Driver Eden Alva, who was profiled in an amicus brief against Uber, knows the pressure all too well. Before the pandemic, I drive knowing that I had to hit the same earnings target each day or I'd start missing my rent payments. I was one illness away from potentially putting my family on the street, and without sick leave, I was forced to continue driving, even when I wasn't 100%. Now, in a pandemic, it's inexcusable that workers are left without basic protections. It is also inexcusable that over 30 million Californians bailed out Uber and Lyft, who had not paid in a single cent into that fund. $413 million they did not pay in. Californians bailed them out. Don't fall for the cheap language, right? Don't fall for these flashy brochures, right? This is what they spent $180 million on. And I broke it down. All of these individual ones here, you'll see in one of my, they're all lies. They're all lies packaged up by lobbyist companies to mislead you, the Californian. So a faulty disability insurance plan, the disability insurance offered through Prop 22 is watered down too. Under California state law, employees can receive a lifetime of disability payments for injuries incurred on the job. Under Prop 22, those payments would be capped at 104 weeks. And that insurance would only be handed out if drivers were not deemed at fault for their disability, the terms of which are unclear. During full-time, driving full-time can take a significant toll on one's body. Eduardo, another driver profiled in the amicus brief, who didn't provide his last name out of fear of retaliation. And you know what, ladies and gentlemen, you need to know that any time a driver speaks up, they'll get terminated, they'll get deactivated, they don't care, right? They don't tolerate any people mentioning their last name and saying, okay, this is how it really is. They get deactivated. This is how the scum of the earth company works, right? So he had to drive longer hours after pay cuts in 2018. He said, I started developing extreme knee pain, became unbearable, which sent me to the emergency room. After a 5-day hospital stay and 2 months of physical therapy, I was finally diagnosed with gout, a condition exacerbated by prolonged sitting. Throughout this ordeal, I had no access to sick leave for my emergency room stay, no access to paid family leave or disability insurance during my recovery. This will likely force me back to work sooner than my doctor recommended, since I have no other way to provide for my family. And that's sad. Those are the real stories, and that's why you vote no on 22. So lack of support during COVID-19, Californians need to hear this. Finally, companies that rely on gig workers, gig drivers, have done little to support efforts to reduce the spread of COVID-19. They didn't get us the PPE. They didn't care a damn. Again, it comes down to that tricky little rule around engaged time. During this pandemic, drivers are taking extra steps to make sure we're safe and passengers are safe, said driver Michaela Edwards. But we seem to be alone in this regard. I was disinfecting my car after every ride, but Uber and Lyft paid me nothing for my time cleaning. They even made the promise that you would get the PPE. They said we had to have the PPE, the masks, to keep the riders safe, right? The riders at first didn't have to wear them. Now everybody has to wear them, but they were not paying for this luxury, what people deserve during the pandemic. This can't possibly be the right incentive if you want to make sure drivers go the extra mile to keep everyone safe. In an op-ed of the New York Times, Uber CEO Dara Khosrowshahi repeatedly highlights the value of independence for drivers, stating, unlike traditional jobs, drivers have total freedom to choose when and how they drive so they can fit their work around their life, not the other way around. But he also acknowledged that freedom, the freedom to work whenever you want, comes with a serious drawback. When the worst happens, too often you're on your own. There has historically been little to no paid support for independent workers if they couldn't work, if they wanted to take a vacation, or more important, if they got sick. The last statement marks a major shift in acknowledging the failures of Uber's current system. So it's a shame the ballot measures does little to mitigate it. Prop 22 has become the most expensive ballot initiative in state history. As of September 16, more than $192 million had been poured into efforts to help it pass. That, combined with deceptive wording on benefits that requires a deeper dive to debunk, means it's going to be a tough initiative to beat. For Lyft, Uber, and DoorDash, its failure would be financially devastating, but for the workers who are the backbone of the gig economy, Props 22 failure is a matter of life and death. And ladies and gentlemen, if you look at an amount like $100